Okay, well, thank you, folks, everybody here. I want to welcome the folks that are here in the webinar with us on Zoom. I want to welcome our viewers on Facebook Live, and I especially want to thank our panelists here with us tonight. We have, those of you who've had a chance to watch the film 2040 know the focus within the film about understanding the vision for the future, especially for our young people, to hear what they see as the future and to think about our role in leaving a world that fulfills that future for them. So we kind of focused on inviting some students here that could give us that perspective. So we've got Amina Covington, who is a student at Newton High School and has come to Sustainable Newton and participated in some of our events in the past and has been a great resource for us. We have Grayson Eady, who's a native of Oxford, Georgia, and a Georgia Tech student. We have Leah Hartung and Jordan Hasty, who are with us, Oxford College and Emory University. We're very grateful to have them here. And then to help us balance out some of the technology aspects of the film with such an emphasis on renewable energy, we got Don Moreland here, who is the president and founder of Solar Crowdsource. We worked with Don at Sustainable Newton over the last couple of years on our Solarize program. And so Don is well positioned to give us some perspective on some of the ideas in the film and how he's seen those things playing out in the real world. So, and then our moderator, Dr. Melissa Hayes, professor of environmental science at Oxford College. So Melissa serves on the board of Sustainable Newton with me, and glad to have her here to moderate this. We didn't just ask these folks to show up and give us a little time tonight. We actually gave them homework. You know, we asked them to watch an hour and a half film, think about it, and come prepared to talk about it. And, you know, a couple of months ago when we set down the path to do this, that didn't seem like that much to ask. But, you know, I think we're all at Zoom fatigue these days as teachers, as business people, as students. So I'm especially grateful to you for putting up with us through that and making this, you know, important enough to you to do that. So we really thank you for that, for doing your homework, and hopefully the folks in our audience today have done that as well and will be very interested to hear what you had to say. So with that, Melissa, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you talk to the panelists.
Okay, great, thank you. And I also want to thank all the panelists for being here. And I did send them all some of these questions in advance, so they had some time to think about it. So hopefully no one's, you know, put on the hot seat with a surprise question. But obviously we'll just kind of see where the conversation takes us, and we'll just pay attention to time, but try to get everyone talking about the film. And I thought a great way to start would be asking you guys the same question that the filmmaker asked all the students around the world about what they hope for the future and what they see in the future, and just kind of describing the future that you want. So Amina, if you want to start with maybe some ideas that you've had about what 2040 might look like if it was up to you.
If 2040 could look like my dream 2040, I would like a more sympathetic and empathetic future for myself. I want people to stop doing things because it benefits them. I want people to do things because it'll benefit everyone else, and because seeing other people happy and seeing other people healthy is the benefit. Like, that's the end goal. I don't want it to be, oh, if I help this person, I might get money out of it, or I might get business out of it. I just want it to be like normal human nature to want to help people. So in 2040, I would like more sympathy and empathy towards people. I'd like communities to come together to help the earth and to create plans for themselves. So just in their own community, they can make things happen. I wouldn't like it to just be what the government or politics. I just want it to be natural, something that's just for the community and everyone can join in, and for it to be normalized to learn about the earth more often. Because even being in 11th grade right now, yes, we have the FFA, but still that's not, I just feel like there should be more. We should have a focus on our earth because we all live here. And if we don't know about it, then how can we care about it? Because if you tell me, oh, you should care about the earth, I'm like, why? Who cares? You know? I'm just going to get my phone, I'm going to get my laptop and do whatever I want. I don't need to know how things work, because when you don't know how they work, you don't see the importance of things. Learning how things work and learning about the origin of where things come from, like food, is super important because it makes you think critically about things and it makes you want to protect it. Moving away from fossil fuels would be nice, although it's not as easy as it sounds at all, because it's a very big industry. But seeing as though that we can't live on them forever, we need to start moving away from them like immediately, or the result of it will be catastrophic. Lastly, I think that we should listen to the people that were here before any of us were here, the Native Americans. I feel as though that they have already set their boundaries and set beautiful things up to focus on biodiversity and protecting habitats and doing things naturally in a way that we just have forgotten, that have worked for years for them. So I think listening to the natives and being more empathetic and building stronger community bonds, and yeah, that'll be the world, the 2040 that I would love to live in. So thank you.
Well, I would definitely like to live in that world. I think that sounds fantastic. And I think a lot of the ideas that you mentioned all kind of work well together. And, you know, if we're taking care of each other naturally, that's going to build stronger communities. And if people are working together, then we can share that education more equitably and think about the earth. And I think everything you said just melds really well together. So thank you for that. Grayson, how about you? Is there anything in addition to maybe what Amina said that you'd like to see in our future for 2040?
Yeah, I mean, my dream 2040 looks a lot like Amina's, it sounds like. One thing that she didn't touch on that I'd like to see in my 2040 is an end to the industrial animal agriculture industry. So with so much of the world's methane pollution coming from cows and other animals that are raised as livestock, if we can move away from that industry entirely, then we would instantly see a massive reduction in our overall warming trends over the next couple of decades. And I think that we're going to also have to see an end to regional power monopolies. That's something that I think is a unique challenge for the United States, is that we're kind of gripped by companies that are in control of the power generation for very large areas. So if we ended regional power monopolies and maybe look towards more of the microgrid models that are talked about in the movie, with distributed renewable power, then we could really see a much more rapid switch off of fossil fuels. And last, I guess, I too would like to see people kind of reconnect with the earth. I think we have a tendency to look at big problems like climate change and other environmental issues and think that the answer is always throwing technology at it. But we have to be in tune with earth processes and various communities to understand how those technologies can best fit and when there are better solutions than engineering the problem out of existence. And I think a lot of what Amina said about reintroducing education about the earth into people's daily lives and early education, you'll see the next wave of engineers being very conscious of that.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And as a professor of environmental science, I absolutely agree that we need more teaching of the earth for everyone, always. So I would love that future. Brought up some great points there. Jordan, what do you think?
Yeah, thank you. For me, I really imagine just a future that's more centered in democracy and centered in community values of just bringing things back to home. I think a lot of what Amina and Grayson said, we're so in some ways alienated from our local environments of the land that is just right around us that can support us. But we're also alienated from each other in a lot of ways. And COVID certainly isn't helping that with social distancing, but I can imagine a future where we have stronger ties and really prioritize an interconnectedness to one another in our own communities and between communities, as well as like within here with the natural processes that Grayson really talked on. I think a lot of that has to take a world where we have more initiative to really more collective action, I would say, to just like really imagine that process democratically. So hopefully we get there.
That's fantastic. I think those are some great additions and, similar themes to what we've heard, but, kind of adding some things and focusing on democracy and how can we work in the system that we have to make it better. So fantastic. Leah, anything to add about what's your 2040 looking like?
Yeah, so I think really like kind of the framework for what I want in 2040 is right now we see ourselves as dominating the land. We see ourselves as this land is here for us to use, and we need to put ourselves back into the ecosystem. We can't view this planet as something for us to take, but instead for something for us to live amongst. And I agree definitely with what Jordan said about community. I think we need to scale everything back. We need to focus on our watersheds and our food sheds and not, shipping, livestock across the country and shipping our produce from these other countries that's causing these greenhouse gas emissions. We need to focus back on democracy in our communities and community building. Smaller farms and organic agriculture and eating less meat, I think are all very important things that we'll need to have an ideal 2040.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think we're kind of starting to see this common theme of community and a lot of this kind of starting with the people and communities and kind of building upwards, as well as having, I know, Grayson, you mentioned some, removing monopolies, power grid systems, and kind of the big coming down, and maybe we find a place to meet somewhere in the middle to get this future that we want. Don, how about you? What's your 2040 like?
Assuming I'm still alive in 2040. I think the young lady in the film said it best. Just 2 words: rocket boots. I think
Yes.
if everybody had some rocket boots, then we'd be able to achieve. If we have rocket boots, then we've already achieved all the things that all these folks have already said and said very well and articulately. My biggest thing, right, is just sustainability. I think we're all out of whack on all kinds of different systems, whether it be energy, agriculture, or the economy. There's just so much inequity, and it feels like it's getting worse instead of getting better. So to be able to get back to some kind of equity among all of these systems and some kind of a corrective balance, if you will, by 2040 would be an amazing feat. And I would feel real good about our future after that.
Yeah, that's a great way to kind of sum everything together that everyone else has mentioned. So we kind of have this idealized 2040 that we all have, and I think the ideas look great. And then we kind of have where we are now, and just kind of curious that separation between where we want to be and where we are, how that makes everybody feel when we start thinking about some of these issues and thinking about tackling climate change and these other sustainability-based issues. Are people hopeful? Is there things to be optimistic about, or is there kind of a sense of, the earlier generations have messed it all up? Are there things that maybe are less hopeful? Or how do you guys feel about trying to make 2040 dreams a reality? Anyone want to get started? Anyone think about that?
Yeah, I can start. I definitely think, the movie definitely made me feel hopeful, which was really good because I watch way too many depressing documentaries about how the world's crashing and burning. But I definitely am still concerned that I just see this disconnect by there still being an argument about the environment versus the economy when, I have to constantly remind people there's no economy with no planet. There really should not be this, argument that, this is a little more expensive, we don't want to do it, when people need to address how dire the situation is. I think that's my main concern is that, I think people are starting to care a lot more about it, but it's still not at the forefront of their minds. And I think, with every decision I make, I try to think about the planet. And I think for us to have, these beautiful futures that we saw in the movie, I think a lot more people need to start thinking that way. So that's definitely a concern I have.
Yeah, but it sounds like you've got some hope in there potentially, and but I think your concerns are absolutely valid and something that needs to be addressed. Anybody else feeling hopeful, feeling concerned? You're just pissed at the past generations.
I think I'm kind of in the same boat that my main concern is just the scale. I think it's really great to see certain countries with developing economies reaching for these more renewable solutions, jumping past the traditional fossil fuel-based infrastructure. But, whenever I think about how much work has to be done within the next 20 years to really reach the critical turning points where we can still revert back and keep it below 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees of warming, that's the kind of thing that makes me a lot more concerned about the future. But what makes me hopeful is it kind of comes from an unexpected place. I would say social media culture can make me feel hopeful in the sense that a lot of environmental thinking have become fads amongst my generation. And if we're so susceptible just to things that we see on social media that our friends are doing, and we start doing them in our own personal lives, what happens when my generation is running the scene? Are we going to take that to the way that we design the world as in the limit, within the limits of what we can do, but are we going to take that mindset into the power that we'll soon have?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. Any other thoughts, Jordan? You look ready. You're ready to pounce.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Okay.
I think with what you're saying about like the blaming of previous generations is such an interesting concept, because it is something that I think is talked about a lot, and there is some due respect that there is some blame for, the crisis that we're in. I don't think it's on an entire generation. It's, certain people in positions, whether that's government or industry, that knew of climate change and the effects that they were having, and then deliberately did nothing or misled the general populace. And that's where I think I'm more empathetic to the generations above me who didn't act on climate change and this situation we're in, because the major determinant, or I should say major obstacle to solving climate change in the past and today, I think is really mistrust. A mistrust of, science, of education, of public institutions. That has been both a product of so many things and a product of a deliberate campaign to sow seeds of doubt into our society about climate change. So in some ways it's understandable to me that people haven't been able to act, because it's hard to figure out what to trust today. I think in looking forward, what really makes me hopeful is the period that we're in now, where it feels very hectic, a lot of turmoil, a lot of instability, especially with this summer coming off the summer of Black Lives Matter, and the US really reckoning with some racial justice within the US that's long overdue. And I think that mobilization and that energy that has really come to the forefront now is so important, because a transition to the future of away from fossil fuels into a more sustainable future has to be a just transition, as it said. It has to include justice and equity for all, because I think kind of like what Dawn said earlier, there's an imbalance in our natural systems, but also in our social systems. And so to get them all in sync, we really have to solve these questions of equity and justice, between ourselves too.
Mm-hmm. That's such an interesting way and a great way to think about it, as we've got all this turmoil and craziness, and it can feel overwhelming and feel daunting and feel hopeless, and to be able to look at that and say, no, this is actually something that makes you feel hopeful, is a really great way to a great spin on what's going on, and a great way to harness that energy and the power that people are starting to realize that they have. So I like thinking about it that way. It makes it feel a little bit better about it. Amina, what do you think? Are you hopeful? Are you concerned? What are you?
I'm a bit I'm in the middle. I've never been the most optimistic person. Some would even call me nihilistic, but I still want to believe that something will happen, that we will finally have a direction, that because what the others said about social media, how people are the youth into it and they're learning more about it. Like when you see people talk about different types of aesthetics, like goblin core, and people are like, oh, I want to go outside, I want to learn about fungus, and I want to learn about rocks, and I want to learn about the systems that make the habitat this, because this is cool now. And great. I think that we're finally getting in a direction where people want to educate themselves, and people are finding things about the earth that they relate to themselves, and they think it's cool, so they want to protect it. And I think that's one of the most optimistic sides of it. But one of the bad sides of it for me as a Black person, with all the turmoil and overwhelming events that have occurred, it gives you a feeling of hopelessness that I felt for these last couple of months during everything. And it's just like, even though there has been a movement, there have been people having conversations that haven't been talked about, will it lead to anything? Because in history, we, as a Black person, yes, we have overcome things, and yes, we've gotten places, but still, are these conversations going to lead to bigger changes? And as a Black person, and I talked with other Black children, when we think about the earth, we don't think about it in a way where, oh yes, Mother Nature is beautiful, we love Mother Nature, because personally we have bitter feelings towards the earth. We had to slave over the earth and got nothing in return, and it just feels like a joke. So when you ask African Americans to get on board with the movement to save the environment, it's like, why would we want to do that when we pillaged it and we built this country and we fought and we got nothing in return? So that's where a bit of it comes from. Like, there's a hatred, I don't want to say a hatred, but there's a bitterness towards the environment, because we feel as though we've done a lot, but we've got nothing from it. So helping it doesn't seem like something that we should have to do. It seems like something that everyone else should have to do, which is not the way we think about it. But when you see the years and years and years of blood and torment and bad treatment, and you're just like, well, I don't want to do anything. It should be their fault. So that's one of the things that keeps me in the dark about it. And mind you, I haven't watched the movie, so hopefully after the movie, I can feel like, yes, finally, we've got something we can do. But for right now, I'm a little bit iffy on the subject. If I should be optimistic if we're going in the right direction, or if I should just keep feeling this hopeless, voiceless way, because I just don't see any evidence that anyone is doing anything, because I'm so overwhelmed with bad.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic perspective, and it's easy to get overwhelmed with all this, with all the problems out there. And how do you know, if you're trying to focus on social justice issues, sometimes they can be like, well, I'm spending my energy here, and how I got to do the environment too, and I've got to do this, and I've got all these problems to save and things to fix, and how do you prioritize? And I think the kind of sense everyone talked about with this idea of community is a really good way to give each other the support and allow different people to focus on different aspects, but overall the whole community is brought up, and trying to take into consideration everyone's feelings on and viewpoints about some of these issues like sustainability really is going to have that community driven component to it that's necessary. So definitely valid reasons for having some concern. And but again, like you said, maybe after the film there'll be some sense of hopefulness, and we can focus on that, which would be great. Don, you've got, you've seen things change over a longer period of time than those we've heard from so far. So you see how things can change, both positively and negatively, and some things stay the same. Do you have reason for hope?
I do, because this little girl right here, number one, she actually just walked up as soon as you asked me that question.
I could sense it timing.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think right now at this very moment, I'm more pessimistic just with the way kind of things are going right now in our little snapshot of the world that we're living in right now. I used to have a lot of anger and hatred to, I don't know, again, yeah, probably not hatred is not the right word, but bitterness toward the generation before me for the state of the world that it was when I was growing up. And I can completely understand how that feeling relates to, the next generation. I guess I'm Generation X, so I'm not a baby boomer, just so you guys know. But I think that makes me a baby boomer just because I say I'm not a baby boomer. That I'm so defensive about it. But yeah, there's a lot of problems, and it wasn't fair. And now, you know, this generation is adopting, you know, a lot of those problems that existed when I was growing up, and, you know, more, because now we're more aware of what's going on with our environment. You know, I kind of liken it to the cigarette industry. I mean, you know, it wasn't, I mean, everybody kind of knew it wasn't going to be good for you, but it wasn't until the science and the data came out after decades of research that it was ultimately determined that this is not a good health outcome, you know, for a population. And so there's something we have to do about it. And now we're seeing carbon emissions kind of relate to the same thing, and how it relates to our world. And that's just an additional burden that this new generation has to deal with that we didn't necessarily deal with growing up as Generation X. So anyway, I'm hopeful. Like I love the angle that the movie took, because it was, what do we have now? What resources do we have right now that we can take advantage of today in 2020 that can net results in 20 years from now? And the optimism I have is that we do have a lot of technology. We've got a lot of know-how. We have a lot of research. We have a lot of data. We can actually tackle this problem right here and right now. But I'm pessimistic that we have the political will to do so. There's so much money and power centered in, you know, the status quo, that to actually turn that large ship around is going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort. And I just hope that this generation, all these wonderful people on this panel that I'm privileged to be able to have the time to share, will continue to try to move that ship around.
Yeah, I think those are some great points. And, you know, it is a huge ship to turn around, but I think unless at least a certain percent of the population has some hopefulness, it's not going to happen, right? If everyone just says, oh, it's a lost cause, it's not going to happen, why even bother? Then we set ourselves back even further. And, you know, as I teach environmental science classes and issues, and it's easy to think of it as a doom and gloom class constantly of here's all the terrible things that are going on our planet. But trying to get that message across of we have solutions that are working. It's how do we scale that up? How do we implement that at larger scales? And I think this movie did a great job of highlighting, you know, 5 different solutions that actually exist right now. They're not just in someone's head. They're not a prototype in a lab. They are taking place, maybe not at a global scale, but at a larger scale than maybe some people realize. And, you know, there was 5 main things that they kind of talked about. In case you haven't seen the film, they were looking at this idea of solar-powered microgrid systems, self-driving mass transit and ride sharing, regenerative agriculture, marine permaculture, and thinking about gender equality. So I was wondering if, of those 5, which one resonated most with each one of you? If there was one that stood out that you thought was the most impressive, or the most interesting, or had the most potential, or you just felt like you had a connection to for some reason. And I'm going to be biased, and Don, I'm going to have you have it start with you to see if I have a guess where you might end up, but I don't want to assume anything.
Yeah, I think I'm qualified to speak to the energy issue.
Okay.
And again, I just love the angle that the film took, and using technology. Grayson, I know you said that, we can't engineer a way out of everything, but in this case, I think we can with energy and building distributed generation systems from the ground up. The solution that they filmed in Bangladesh is exactly where by 2040 I would like to see things happening here in the United States and other developed countries. The benefits that they had at this village in Bangladesh is that they didn't have an existing grid that everybody was tapped into. They actually built this grid from scratch from each individual home. And I love the molecular analogy with each cell building upon each other to form an organism. But here in the United States and most of the world, we've already got a grid. So I even looked up the technology. I thought the technology was fascinating. It was called the Soul Share box, and then they have a whole suite of other things that go to accompany the Soul Share box in order to create that microgrid among that village and to be able to buy and sell electricity among peer to peer would be critically important, because along with a more sustainable world, we're talking about a more just world, right? And the great thing about solar technology is that it's distributed and that each and every person can generate their own electricity on their own property. And that is the very democratization of energy that we want to see. I actually wrote this other thing down too, is that currently returns of all production accrue to 1% of the population. That is the kind of imbalance that I was talking about before. And now through the power of solar, and I'm partial to solar because I work in the industry, but there's probably other renewable energy solutions that are out there. But now we have the power to generate our own electricity on our own property and do it at a rate that is cheaper or at the same cost as what you would get from the utility. So if you can do it, it makes good economic sense to do it as well. The trick is, how are you going to be able to build such a microgrid ecosystem like they had in that village in Bangladesh and kind of apply that on a scale that we're here at the United States, in the United States. And the truth is that the technology actually exists right now. Mm-hmm. In Georgia and some of the other states, we're a very highly regulated energy industry. We've got these large utility companies that are generating electricity using fossil fuels and sending that electricity through distribution and transmission lines to the individual users. But now we can distribute that, and all the benefits of distributed generation can that can be distributed among a greater amount of people. And with solar, with batteries, with the Internet of Things, and through some smart grid infrastructure, we can accomplish these microgrids. But for the peer-to-peer transaction financing, one thing I am very interested in is blockchain technology that can be applied, these kind of micro transactions that can be utilized to be able to buy and sell energy among us, among each other. But so all that technology exists, the will exists, except the political and the regulatory environment prohibits it. And that's the problem right there. There's other states that have deregulated energy economies. Georgia is not. We're very heavily regulated, but we're starting to see microgrids pop up around the country, and the utilization of blockchain technology can make what we saw in Bangladesh possible on a large scale here in the United States. So that was kind of my takeaway on the energy side. Melissa, thank you.
Well, that's great to know this, you're talking about the connection to the United States, and it's starting to pop up in some places, and you just made me more hopeful about the microgrid system. So fantastic. Thank you. Grayson, what about you? Of those 5 solutions in the film, which one stood out most to you or you connected with for some reason?
I would have to say the regenerative agriculture solution that they talked about probably resonated with me most. Kind of similar to things we were talking about earlier, there are very few solutions to environmental challenges that simultaneously work towards making the future better and account for past wrongs. Whereas solar does transition us away from future fossil fuel use, it doesn't make up for the millions of tons of carbon that have been emitted up until this point. So with the regenerative agriculture, you're increasing the amount of carbon that is able to be held in the soil. You're replenishing soil and preventing erosion. And in some cases, you can produce just as much food. We're just realizing that we've escalated the situation so much that when our soil gets worse, we think, oh, I know we need to apply more fertilizer. But, that's another thing where we can kind of walk it back and look at natural solutions and be in tune with earth processes and really have a simple solution that's been right in front of us. So I just love how simple regenerative agriculture is as a solution. It doesn't require some fancy technology. It's really just stripping away the technology, but getting better results.
Yeah, and I think your comment and thinking about how this one thing can solve a variety of different problems that we have and kind of work backwards and help right the wrongs of the past, but it's really can address a variety of the situations related to sustainability and beyond. So I thought that one was really cool as well. Leah, did any of them speak to you?
So I was definitely drawn to the solar microgrid, I think particularly because of their not having to be reliant on others and really being able to keep the profits within their community, especially now that I've started paying my own electricity bill. I can definitely see the benefit of making sure that this money stays in the system. And I especially know with my, Georgia Power, where we pay our electricity bill, how little transparency there is and how little I can find out about where exactly my electricity is coming from, the pollution of it, how are the workers being treated. I think it's really nice to know this is where my electricity is coming from. This is where the money's going. Really just that transparency is so key. But I think another thing that I was also really attracted to was also the regenerative agriculture. And that's really because in Dr. Hage's class, we went to the Oxford Organic Farm. And so I grew up in Illinois, so I've seen, how monoculture just completely destroys biodiversity with all the corn that we have. But I never knew how terrible the effects are. I never knew that, the soil is supposed to be living. It's supposed to have these microorganisms and these biomes and, earthworms. But in these massive farms, in these industrial farms, there's nothing living in there. And so they just keep throwing fertilizer at the problem, and they have to keep just throwing these unnatural things into the system because the system is no longer in balance. And so I think it's just so important in general, just trying to have this regenerative agriculture, and especially because you saw how much better the biodiversity was. You saw just the living things coming back. You saw the soil. I mean, I think that was really important when they showed that dry, compacted soil. And I was just thinking about, trying to dig up into it and try to plant something versus that, soft soil that looks like it's full of nutrients and just ready, to produce some delicious food. So I think that was also something that really resonated with me.
Yeah, definitely. Those are some great points. Jordan, how about you?
Yeah, I think I would just like to continue on the regenerative agriculture for a little bit to talk about the social aspect of it as well, because so often we talk about these natural systems and the importance of really getting carbon back into the soil and growing our food in a more sustainable way. But there's also the aspect of farmers, who's growing our food. I'm originally from northern Missouri. I spent my summer living with my grandparents on their beef cattle farm. And so I think there's so much that's in the agriculture industry that has been taken away from smallholder farms that it's a trend that's all over our society, and it's been concentrated in more industrial sites. So I just know, speaking to the history of it, of speaking with my grandparents and people from the area, it's gone from a culture where you'd have so many farmers farming a couple acres, a couple dozen head of cattle, to, massive feedlots that house thousands and like millions of animals in the aggregate. And so something that really struck me in the documentary was, what do we tell the farmers? Because now within the Midwest and rural areas, there is a lot of animosity towards climate change. And they often feel attacked as in like, you are the problem, you cattle farmers are the problem. But it's more that we need farmers, and we need farmers to have the resources, the time, the financial resources to farm their land in a sustainable manner. And that's not just to the whims of what's profitable for them so that they can subsist. A lot of like these small farmers who have just driven out of business over the last couple of decades in favor of industrial, more bigger farmers. But also just having a newer generation of farmers come up. The average age of the farmer is around 50 years old in the US. And so we have this huge opportunity for a crop of new people to really like inherit this land and do so in a more sustainable fashion.
Yeah, I think you bring up some great points, just how, we don't have to think about all of these problems that we have as separate. Of environmental issues and social issues really do go hand in hand so well, and working on one is going to help the other. And they're so intricately connected that any progress you can make in any one area is really going to bring everybody up, and thinking about how we can support each other as a community trying to solve big problems. Leah, you think you were going to say something? I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Jordan said. And yeah, we're definitely seeing this trend. You go to the grocery store, you think you have all these different food choices, but really it's about 10 brands. And there's just different marketing for each of them. So yeah, no longer is it, these small farms trying to produce for their local economies. But now, once again, with worker justice, it's, especially in the animal agriculture industry, they are accruing debt, and they don't actually own, they own the debt, but they don't own the animals, and they don't own the profits. So they're, having to accrue this debt, while these, about 5, meat industry companies are the ones getting the profits. And, they're taking this money, and these people are barely even able to make a living while we have this booming meat industry. So there's a lot of environmental justice issues that really coincide that, if we can try to fix our agriculture system, not only is it going to help the planet, but it's also going to help the people.
Yeah, we have to stop having these things be at odds with each other, of farmers feeling like they have to do what's right for their profit and being able to feed their families and take care of their own, or, farm sustainably. And those two things shouldn't be a choice, like you guys have pointed out. So, Amina, I know you didn't get a chance to see the film yet, so maybe you're less familiar with some of these specific solutions, but I thought you'd be a great transition to thinking of our next question of just in general, based on maybe what you've read or heard or knowledge that you have, is there a solution? Is there things going on right now that are addressing issues of sustainability and climate change that you think are possible solutions that should be expanded on? What do you think we're doing right now that we should maybe be doing more of?
I personally cannot talk on an American scale of what we're doing.
Sure.
Because I have dual citizenship and I lived in Bermuda for the longest time of my childhood. I can speak about what they're doing there.
That'd be great.
Thank you. So for a long time there, I was in a thing called Dolphin Quest, where they took in dolphins and sometimes they did shows, and that was cute or whatever. But I was more interested in learning about them. And they offered this program that was beautiful. It didn't just teach you about, dolphins and whatever. It taught you about how to protect them, how to protect their habitats, all the other animals that were in Bermuda shores. And in Bermuda, the environment is very important. And locals are very important because literally all farm to table. The little plots of land that you drive by in Bermuda, that is the food that you are eating. So teaching the children about where milk comes from and all the process that milk has to go through to be able to be eaten at school, like the exact same thing that we have at school to eat is exactly what the farmers had. So there was that respect and there was that know-how and that empathy towards farmers, because I think when we look at farms in America, it's like, oh yeah, they just do the job. But when you look at how backbreaking and how difficult the work is and how hard it is to do, you finally have a respect for them. You're like, what can we do to make your job easier? What can we do to make your job more profitable? And hearing my peers on the panel say what their experiences with farming just proves the point that we need to have a better relationship with the people that are feeding the country, because these big meat industries are doing us no good and they're doing our farmers no good as well. So that really stood out to me, as well as the marine permaculture. That, as a person who was going to be a marine biologist, that sounds amazing with the seaweed and everything. As well as one other thing we could add was conservation of whales, because one whale takes up 52 tons of carbon when they die, which is just amazing. That's not 52 carbons. They take up 50 trees. So instead of planting a bunch of trees, if we stopped murdering whales and stopped with fracking a lot and stopped with boating in the areas and let them do what they do best, then that carbon problem, it wouldn't be totally gone, of course, because you can't just breed a bunch of whales and think, yeah, we're good. No, but still, it could help. So the marine permaculture and teaching about our farmers and educating ourselves on where our food comes from definitely hit me. So I'm excited to see what the movie goes into and to see what else we're doing that's sustainable.
Yeah, fantastic. I like those ideas. Those are great. I think for me, the last one that they brought up in the film with thinking about gender equality really stood out for me, because I always remembered some documentary, BBC, David Attenborough saying there isn't a single environmental problem that wouldn't be easier to solve if there was less people. And I'm not saying let's get rid of people that we have. It's a dangerous road to go down, but thinking about how we manage our population moving forward, and these problems are just going to get harder and harder if we have more people. And a fantastic way to just naturally have population control is by empowering our young girls and women to get educated and find careers, and whether it's maybe going into farming, as we've talked about, the importance of that would be fantastic. You just see this natural repercussion of women having children later in life and having less children and dealing with that population in a socially justice minded way, as opposed to limiting. Other countries have tried ways to limit population that maybe isn't as fair and equitable. So for me, that's the one that stood out. But is there any other, environmental solutions that you guys have stumbled across? You're all well-read, intelligent people that you think we should touch on real quick, kind of as we're nearing the end? Yeah, Jordan, I saw a hand move.
Yeah, I was just going to continue on with that gender equality issue, especially because, we think about this as a global issue of human rights and equity. And so a lot of the places around the world that need more education and our globe is around the globe. And so we really have to empower people with the resources to have the sort of education and the resources they need to make decisions such as that. But also, so much of our women around the world are in many times socialized at least to be the bastions of community and also to work the land. So much of our agriculture is dominated by smallholder women across the globe. And so I think really empowering these women to be leaders in their communities and sort of bring in a new sort of intelligence that is more connected with community and the land that I think isn't always prioritized in our globe, with some of the dominance of masculinity in many times. And that's not set in stone. It doesn't have to be that way. It's all based on socialization. Men can certainly step into this role of community and getting more in touch with the land, but we also have to recognize where we are in the world today.
Absolutely. So anyone else have any technology?
Yeah, I think it's also just, important to think about. I know it's, undergrad for environmental science. I think it's around 50-50 male, female, but as you start to go up to masters and PhDs, you're going to see a lot more males in the field. So I think, you know, empowering women to be able to step into these roles to figure out these issues is also just super crucial. And I guess like it's not really a technology, but
Sure.
something that I definitely think is very important to talk about is just degrowth, and just thinking differently about kind of how we approach our lives, and that it's not necessarily about sustainable economic growth, because that's always going to require more resources and more land and more labor, but just trying to step back from, you know, this consumerism that we've all been so engulfed in, and, you know, thinking like, do we really need that next Amazon purchase? Where is this going to end up? Is this just, you know, going to be fun for a night and then end up in the landfill? And, you know, and just recognizing our own footprints, especially being in the industrialized West, how much larger our footprints are, and not necessarily believing that we can continue extracting all these materials and having this sustainable economic growth, but really just stepping back and thinking, you know, is economic growth really our number one priority? Is that really what's going to make us the happiest? Or is it maybe stepping back and reconnecting with nature and trying to address the plant blindness that so many people have? And yeah, just really trying to reconnect with our world, I think, is a lot more important than this economic growth myth people are trying to perpetuate.
And that's great because it doesn't cost anything.
Yeah.
I
I wanted to jump in because we had Bill Couch had put a comment in the chat, and it triggered a question for me that I'd be interested to hear you guys' thoughts on. And as what Bill says is, I'm disappointed we've accepted an increase of 1.5 Celsius. A real effort should shoot for the moon, not default to a situation that's worse than what we have today. And, you know, when he said shoot for the moon, I take that kind of literally because, you know, I was a very small child when President Kennedy said we would do that. But, you know, we spent our time imagining what we could do, not thinking of all the reasons we couldn't do it. So where does that come from? And is that true? Have we gotten to the point now that we spend most of our energy thinking why we can't do things? And if so, why is that? What can we do about it?
Can I
Go ahead, Mina. Yeah.
Okay, I think it's because we place a lot, like in Western culture, we place a lot of our importance on more materialistic consumerism ideals. We don't really think about the future per se in the most earth-conscious way. We think, oh, if I save up, I can buy these new shoes. We don't think, oh, if I save up, I can put this back into the community and I can do this and I can help. No, it's mostly it's a me thing, and I'm not gonna sit here and say I'm all holier than thou and I'm always thinking of the earth, because I'm not, because no one is, and we should always be thinking about the earth. But it's about shifting an entire culture of consumerism to a culture that thinks more about each other and more about the effects they will have on each other and the earth that they live on. So getting people to care about the earth as much as they cared about back then, like in Mr. Maurice's time, about going to the moon, it's gonna be difficult because we don't care. We're not taught to care about the earth like we were taught to care about, oh my gosh, we can go to the moon. No one's saying, oh my gosh, we can save the earth. It's not cool. It's not seen as something that's like a pop culture thing. It's seen as, there's kids over there waving little save the earth flags. Everybody's young and protesting. That's cute. That's not cool. But me buying these new pairs of shoes will get me more rewards than me trying to save the earth. So I think it's moving away from that type of materialistic thinking, and because we're rewarded for it. We're not rewarded for going out and educating the youth on the earth. We're seen as boring. We're educated when we go and we talk about this new clothing or this new brand or this new food or something that we can consume. So making it seem important and making it seem cool and making it more better to, like, I don't know, just more fancy, I guess. It's not the best word, but making it seem better for people, like that they're getting something out of it. I think that can kind of like do a reverse psychology, like, blocking something out of it. We all get to live, but in a better way that would actually help. So that's my 2 cents on it.
So Saving the Earth needs a marketing director and a branding expert for selling it to people to, and I think that's maybe this idea of selling the hopefulness that it isn't too late, that we're not, you know, we're kind of this idea that it's too late. We've already, you know, there's, you know, 1.5 degrees. Oh my God, we can't possibly go back to 1 degree. It's way too late. We don't have, you know, there's too many problems. It's too big. Let's just settle for 1.5. And I think a lot of that comes from people not being hopeful and not realizing that this is something that they can still make a difference on, and not feel, you know, I'm not going to do anything because it's too late. And I think that's probably a huge how I think of Bill's situation or comment. Don, you were going to say something before. I don't know if it's related or if it's a new cool technology or just a thought off the top of your head.
It's not so much related to Bill's comment, although I agree with him. You know, as far as, you know, trying to, you know, let's not settle for something in the middle. Let's you know, shoot for pre-industrial level, you know, temperatures or parts per million of carbon, you know, things like that. But I wanted to just, I think I was going off what Leah had said before, and I look at it a little bit differently. I think we don't have to decouple economic prosperity with environmental sustainability. I think that you know, you can have both at the same time. And Leah, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I view the clean energy economy as the biggest job creation and economic development opportunity of our generation. And it's kind of like our shot to the moon. I really believe that, yeah, some jobs will shift from fossil fuels, you know, into a different sector, but the overall growth of the economy and the saving of our environment and the health benefits that come with it they far outweigh the expense or you know whatever additional costs it might take to get there. You know, the additional costs that we might have to incur now in order to get to that future. But actually, solar and wind and other renewable technologies are now at grid parity with fossil fuels. So it's not, you know, it's not even that we have to sacrifice having to pay more for the same kind of service. Like, we can actually pay less for the same service and do it in a environmentally sustainable way.
Awesome. It's great to hear all the different perspectives, and I think it'd be interesting, you know, to kind of approach these from both ends of how do we grow these new jobs and these new economies, but also, you know, have this connection of still, you know, buying less stuff. Like, if I'm going to buy something, let me buy solar panels for my house instead of, you know, the new pair of shoes. And how do we shift that thinking of how we spend our money so that we are still supporting a thriving economy, but just maybe a different kind of economy.
Yeah, I think we're actually, it's sort of a backwards way of thinking, but I think we're poised to take advantage of the materialistic nature of American culture, because we're at a point where so many cool new products are very environmentally conscious. You know, if suddenly everything that all one-use or single-use plastic that we're using is made from plant material, you know, then we can buy a lot of the same stuff that we're used to without having as much impact. Or if we're making solar panels and other energy solutions much more viable options for individuals to put on their homes, then everybody's going to want to have the nicest new solar roof, just like they want to have the nicest new electric car. So I think we have some cool ways that negative things in American culture can be leveraged to produce more positive outcomes.
That's a fantastically optimistic way to think about things. I love it. And I mean, I think of the, watching the video, and every time they did a fast forward to the future, I mean, I've grown up in America, and I see all these things. I'm like, oh, I want all those things. I want the rocket boots, and I want whatever screen that they had on the wall that they were talking to, and they
should
peeled
just
it off and took
roll
it
it up
away. And like, I wanted all that stuff. And if that stuff can serve a greater purpose, and if it can provide some solutions, and I'm in, I'm done, I'm ready. I think it's great.
Well, and I'll be the timekeeper here, just because I know we've taken an hour now, an hour and a half of you guys' study time. We took an hour and a half of your time to watch the movie. But for me personally, what makes me optimistic is you guys. And,
Yes.
The combination of passion, seriousness, but just speaking in informed ways. I think, overarching all of this is the simple question of how we just have more conversations. And that's what we try to do as Sustainable Newton. And it's, you guys are an excellent embodiment of, what we think we need to do more of. So I thank each of our panelists so much for being here. Melissa, I thank you for doing a great job of leading the conversation. I do want to remind people that, if you're on here now and you haven't watched the movie yet, you still got a couple of days. So our licensing worked, we got a week, and that week started at 9 a.m. this past Saturday. So the film's available for you out there until this coming Saturday morning at 9. And actually, if you don't get a chance to see it, then I have found a number of other places where you can stream it virtually. Some want to charge something, some are free. We did ours free and let people that wanted to make a donation. But somehow, take the time and find the film if you haven't watched it yet. I think it'll be worthwhile. And so coming up, a couple of events that are not ours, but we like to highlight partners that are doing good things. There's another film, speaking of regenerative agriculture, there's a film coming out. It's going to be on Netflix starting next week on the 22nd. There's a lot of celebrities in there. Woody Harrelson narrates it, but there's a lot of scientists and other folks there. But it's all about regenerative agriculture, and looks like a great movie. So they're having their global watch party next Tuesday, and you can sign up for that. I think we're going to try to do a watch party on our Facebook page. But anyway, we want to mention that the Georgia Climate Project does great work here in our state and takes a lot of these issues and brings them down to a local level and focuses on what we can do in Georgia. So they're going to start a series of webinars. They've got one coming up on the 30th about what climate change means for the coast of Georgia. We've got our virtual screening of another film coming up first 2 weeks in October, the story of plastic. So we'll have another group of panelists there for that one. Conversation coming up with a filmmaker out of Minnesota, Erica Gilsdorf, who's traveling across the country this fall and next spring in a electric vehicle pulling a tiny house. So she's walking the walk, and so she originally was going to come see us this fall. She's now going to come see us next spring. So I'm going to have her on. We're going to talk to her a little bit about her journey and how she's getting about and what she's going to be seeing along the way. And then we have a presentation coming up on October 10th, the Climate Reality Project, the Al Gore organization that some of us trained in last year. They every year have 24 hours of reality, which is a global event with some 30,000 presentations around the world. So we'll be doing one. I and Melissa and Theodosia Wade, another of our board members, will be doing that presentation on the 10th. And then we'll have the panel discussion for the story of plastic, and on and on and on. So we think these conversations are super important. But again, you guys did a great job for us tonight. We really appreciate it. Appreciate the people that joined, through the various mechanisms out there. And let's just keep it up, and we hope you guys will stay engaged with us. You're a great hope for our future. So with that, we'll wrap it up for the evening and let everybody get back to whatever else. But thank you so much.
Yes, thank you guys. I love talking with everyone. It was fantastic.
Yeah, it was really, really great. Thank you guys for having us.
All right.
Yes, thank you for having me. It was great fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.